The Harley's engine didn't drown out the silence anymore. 3 years had taught Marcus Stone that some sounds lived louder than chrome and horsepower. Grief had a frequency that cut through everything mechanical, everything solid, everything real. He twisted the throttle harder anyway, watching the Oregon pines blur into streaks of green along Highway 99, the same route he'd ridden every Sunday morning since October 14th, 2020, the day they buried Lily, the day they buried Rachel. The day Marcus learned that 7 tons of semi-truck could erase a family in the time it takes to blink. The morning air tasted like wet earth and pine needles, that particular Oregon cold that settled into bones and refused to leave. Marcus pulled his gloves tighter against the chill. Though he barely felt temperature anymore, hadn't really felt much of anything since standing in that hospital corridor, while a doctor with kind eyes and terrible news explained that impact trauma meant his wife and daughter were gone before the ambulance arrived. Sometimes Marcus wondered if he died too that night, if this was just his ghost going through motions because no one had told his body to stop. Pinewood Cemetery appeared around the bend exactly where it always did, the moss-covered iron gate standing sentinel over 200 years of Oregon dead. Marcus killed the engine and let the silence crash over him like a wave. Sunday mornings belonged to Lily, had belonged to her for 156 weeks straight, each visit a ritual of white lilies and memories that grew harder to hold with clarity. That terrified him more than anything, the way her laugh was starting to sound fuzzy in his head, the way he couldn't quite remember if her favorite color had been purple or blue, the way grief was slowly stealing even the sharpest pieces of her. He reached into the saddlebag and pulled out the flowers. White lilies. Always white. Rachel had loved them, had filled their house with them every spring until the scent became synonymous with home. Now Marcus brought them to cold granite every week, a promise he'd made to no one but kept anyway because breaking it felt like losing them twice. The gravel path crunched under his boots, each step heavy with practiced sorrow. Past the oak tree where crows gathered, like mourners in black. Past the Korean War veterans with their faded flags. Past the angel statue with the broken wing that Lily had named Eleanor because she said lonely things deserve names too. His daughter had possessed that rare kind of sight, the ability to see value in broken things, beauty in forgotten corners, humanity in places other people looked away from. The thought made his throat tighten in that familiar way, the invisible hand squeezing until breathing became work. She'd been 10 years old, too small, too kind, too bright for a world that chewed up angels and spit them out without mercy. But the world had taken her anyway, taken her and Rachel both on a rainy night that was supposed to be just a quick drive, just a quick errand, just a quick Marcus stopped. Someone was at Lily's grave. Every instinct honed over 20 years with the Hell's Angels snapped to attention. The figure was small, hunched against the headstone like it was trying to disappear into the granite itself. A child, maybe 12 or 13, thin enough that the wind seemed to blow right through him. His clothes hung off his frame in layers of dirt and wear, the kind of filth that didn't come from playing outside but from living outside. His shoes were held together with duct tape and determination. The boy's shoulders shook violently, face pressed against Lily's headstone, as if he were begging the stone to answer him, to give him something it could never give. Marcus felt anger spike hot and immediate. This was his space, his grief, his daughter. But the anger shifted before it could fully form. The boy wasn't vandalizing, he was mourning. A twig snapped under Marcus's boot. The boy jerked upright with the pure terror of prey that knows the predator is too close. He scrambled backward, hands up defensively, and something fell from his grip. It hit the ground with a soft thud that shouldn't have mattered, shouldn't have registered, but Marcus's eyes locked onto it instantly, and the world tilted sideways. A leather bracelet, worn and faded with careful stitching that spelled out a single letter. The turquoise beads Lily had saved 3 months of allowance to buy. The bracelet she'd worn every single day until they dressed her for the casket, the one Marcus had watched them place on her small wrist before they closed the lid forever. The bracelet that should not exist outside that grave. Marcus's voice came out rough gravel and broken glass barely held together. "Where did you get that?" The boy flinched like the words were physical blows. His eyes went wild, his whole body trembling so hard his teeth chattered. "I didn't steal it. I swear I didn't steal it. I was going to put it back. I just needed." His voice cracked and broke, and he looked ready to bolt, every muscle tensed for flight. Marcus forced himself to take a breath, to unclench his fists that had balled up without permission, to remember this was a terrified child and not a threat. "What's your name, kid?" The boy's lips trembled. "Evan." The word came out so quiet Marcus almost missed it, just a whisper of sound that barely made it across the 3 feet between them. Marcus crouched down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening, the way you approach something fragile that might shatter if you breathe wrong. He kept his eyes on the bracelet, on that impossible thing that couldn't be here, that broke every law of what was buried and what wasn't. "Evan, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "How do you know my daughter?" The boy wiped his face with a trembling sleeve, leaving a streak of dirt across his cheek. For a long moment, he just stared at Marcus with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young, eyes that held the kind of exhaustion that came from surviving when survival shouldn't have been necessary. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, fragile as spider silk. "She found me." 2 words. They landed like hammer blows. About 6 months before she died, I was sleeping behind the dumpster at the Maple Street Diner in Ashland. Something twisted in Marcus's chest. The Maple Street Diner, where Rachel had worked the evening shift, where he used to pick Lily up after Rachel got off work, where his daughter would run out with grease-stained paper bags of leftover fries and that gap-toothed smile that could light up the darkest parts of him. While he'd been waiting in the parking lot, checking his phone, living his normal life, there'd been a child sleeping 20 feet away behind a dumpster. The thought made him sick. Evan's hands shook as he continued, words coming slowly like he was pulling them up from some deep well of memory he'd been guarding. "I'd been on the streets about 4 months by then. My mom, she had problems. Child services kept moving me around and I couldn't do it anymore. The foster homes, the questions, the looks. So I ran. I was living behind that dumpster because it blocked the wind, and sometimes the kitchen staff would throw out food that was still good if you didn't mind eating it cold." Marcus's throat constricted. His mind raced backward, cataloging every evening he'd picked Lily up, every time he'd idled in that parking lot, completely oblivious to suffering happening in his peripheral vision. How many times had he driven right past this boy? "Most people didn't see me." Evan's voice got quieter, smaller, like he was trying to take up less space even in memory. "Or they did see me, but they looked away real fast, you know. Like if they didn't look at me, then I wasn't real. Wasn't their problem. Some people yelled at me to get lost, called me names, told me I was making the place look bad." The words hung in the cold air between them, an indictment of every adult who'd chosen convenience over compassion. "But Naomi." The boy's voice cracked on the name, and fresh tears spilled down his face. "Naomi saw me." The correction came automatic, a father's reflex. "Lily." Her name was Lily. Evan blinked, confusion clouding his features for a moment before understanding dawned. "She told me her name was Naomi, said it meant pleasant in Hebrew, that her mom picked it, that it was her secret name, the one she gave to people who really knew her." Marcus felt something break loose in his chest. Rachel had wanted to name their daughter Naomi, had fought for it, loved it, whispered it to their newborn in the hospital. But Marcus's mother had been Lily and had died 6 months before their daughter was born, and in his grief, he pushed for Lily as a compromise. They'd agreed Naomi would be the middle name, Lily Naomi Stone. And apparently their daughter had claimed the unused name as her own private identity, given it to a homeless boy, it as a gift, a secret shared between 2 people the world had decided didn't matter. Marcus's hands shook now too as he held that impossible bracelet, his fingers tracing the letter that could have stood for Lily or for the hidden Naomi underneath. He realized he was holding his breath, waiting for Evan to continue, needing to hear this story even though every word was a knife. She was carrying a to-go bag. Evan's voice strengthened slightly, memory giving him something to hold on to. Leftover fries from the diner. It was raining that night, cold rain that went straight through your clothes, and I was curled up under this soaked blanket that smelled like mildew, trying to stay warm. Most kids would have run past me. Probably should have run past me. I looked scary. I know I did. Dirty and desperate, and like someone you cross the street to avoid. But she just stopped right there in the rain and stared at me for like 10 seconds. And then she came closer. Marcus could picture it with painful clarity. Lily in her pink raincoat, that stubborn streak, She'd inherited from Rachel the way she'd never been afraid of anything, the way she gravitated toward broken things that needed fixing. Stray cats, wounded birds, kids who sat alone at lunch. She collected lost things the way other children collected dolls, brought them home with fierce determination, until Marcus learned to expect the unexpected every time he walked through the door. She knelt down right there in the dirty water. Wonder crept into Evan's voice despite the grief. She knelt down in a puddle next to a dumpster behind a diner. And she opened that bag and took out half her sandwich and held it out to me. And then she said something I'll never forget as long as I live. Evan's eyes met Marcus's and held them. She said, "You shouldn't be cold alone. Not you shouldn't be cold, but you shouldn't be cold alone." Like the worst part wasn't the cold itself. It was being alone in it. Tears burned in Marcus's eyes and he didn't try to stop them. This was his daughter, his Lily, his Naomi, and he was hearing about a whole part of her life he'd never known existed. A secret kindness she'd been carrying out while he'd been completely oblivious, wrapped up in his own concerns, his own daily grind, missing the enormous, beautiful, heartbreaking thing she'd been doing right under his nose. From that day on, Evan's voice grew stronger, now more certain. She brought me food almost every afternoon. Sometimes it was leftovers from the diner. Sometimes it was half her lunch from school. Sometimes it was granola bars or fruit or whatever she could sneak out without anyone noticing. And she'd hide little notes in the napkins. Little notes that said things like, "Stay warm today," or "I hope you ate something good," or "Tomorrow will be better." She signed them with a little drawn sun and her initial. And Marcus remembered finding those notes in Lily's backpack once. Dozens of them, half-written encouraging messages on napkins and scraps of paper. He'd thought she was writing them for friends at school, maybe for kids who were having a hard time. He'd been proud of her for it had told Rachel their daughter had such a big heart. He'd never imagined, never even considered, that those notes were going to a homeless child living behind a dumpster. She'd sit with me sometimes. Something almost happy crept into Evan's voice now, despite everything. While her mom finished her shift at the diner, Naomi would sit with me on the cold, concrete steps behind the building. And she'd just talk. She'd tell me about her drawings, about this dog your family had, Charlie Marcus heard himself say. Black Lab mix, died 2 years before Lily. About Charlie. About how she wanted to help people nobody else saw when she grew up. She talked about you too. About your motorcycle. About how you taught her to be brave. About how you always kept your promises. The weight of it crashed over Marcus like a physical force. His 10-year-old daughter had been conducting a secret rescue mission for months, feeding and caring for a homeless child, while Marcus had been completely unaware. While he'd been wrapped up in club business and work concerns and all the daily minutiae that seemed so important, but turned out to be nothing at all compared to what Lily had been doing. She was my friend. Evan whispered the words like they were sacred. My only friend in the whole world. The only person who looked at me and saw someone worth knowing. Marcus stared at this trembling boy with his worn-out shoes and his frightened eyes and his thin frame that screamed neglect, and something cracked open inside him. Something he'd kept sealed tight since the day they buried his family. This boy had mattered to Lily. This boy had been precious to her. And that made him precious, period. The logic was simple, even if the emotions were anything but. "How did you know she passed?" Marcus's voice came out hoarse, almost afraid of the answer. Evan's face crumpled, and he wrapped his arms around himself, like he was trying to hold his body together through sheer force of will. "She promised me a blanket." The words came out broken, jagged, with old pain that had never healed. "That last day I saw her, it was getting so cold at night, and she saw me shivering really bad. And she grabbed my hand, and she promised me she was going to bring me a real blanket that night. A warm one. She said she said you had extras in the garage, and you wouldn't miss one. She made me promise I'd wait for her behind the diner. She made me promise I wouldn't leave." Marcus felt his heart splitting open. That night, the night of the accident, Lily had been insistent about going back out, had told Rachel she forgot something important at school, had begged for just one quick trip. Rachel had said no initially because it was already dark and raining, but Lily had that look in her eyes, that determined, fierce look that meant she wasn't going to let it go, so Rachel had agreed. Just a quick there and back, just 20 minutes, just one more promise to keep. They never made it back. I waited, Evan's voice dropped to almost nothing, staring at his hands like they held answers they didn't. I waited behind that dumpster for hours. It was so cold that night, the coldest night I'd had in weeks. The wind was coming straight through my clothes, and I didn't have anything to block it. But I didn't leave because I promised her I'd wait. I kept thinking she'd come around the corner any minute with that blanket and that smile and everything would be okay. Because Naomi always kept her promises. Always. Evan's voice broke completely. But she never came. I waited until after midnight, until I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, until I was shaking so hard I thought my bones might break. And I kept telling myself she got held up, or her parents said no, or maybe she'd come in the morning. So I tried to sleep, but I couldn't because I was too cold and too worried, and something felt wrong. Something felt really wrong. Marcus could barely breathe. While this child had been freezing behind a dumpster waiting for a daughter who would never come, Lily had been lying on a highway, and Marcus had been standing in that hospital hallway being told there was nothing they could do, that the impact had been too severe, that his little girl was gone, that his wife was gone, that everything was gone. The next morning, Evan's voice shook with the memory. I was still behind the dumpster trying to get warm in the sun, and I heard voices. Two waitresses came out for their smoke break, and they were crying. Really crying. Not just tears, but that kind of crying where you can't catch your breath. And I heard one of them say a name. Lily Stone. She said there had been an accident on Interstate 5 the night before. She said a little girl was dead. Dead on the scene. Evan's whole body started shaking again. I didn't want to believe it. I kept thinking maybe it was a different Lily. Had to be a different Lily because my Naomi was supposed to bring me a blanket. She promised. But then the other waitress said something about Rachel, who worked evenings, about how she'd lost her daughter, about how the funeral was going to be at Pinewood Cemetery. And I just knew. Marcus watched as Evan pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to stop tears that wouldn't stop coming. I ran. I grabbed my stuff, and I ran, and I didn't stop running until I couldn't breathe, until my lungs were burning and my legs gave out. I ended up in some woods somewhere, and I just screamed. I screamed until my voice was gone because it wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that the only person who'd ever been kind to me was gone. And she was gone because she was trying to bring me a blanket, because she was trying to take care of me, and that meant it was my fault. It wasn't your fault. The words came out of Marcus immediately, fiercely, with all the conviction he could muster. But Evan shook his head. It felt like my fault. It still feels like my fault. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't needed help, she wouldn't have been on that road. She'd still be alive. Evan's voice dropped to barely a whisper. For a week, I didn't eat anything. Didn't want to. Didn't feel like I deserved to. But then I remembered something Naomi said once. She said, even when things are terrible, you have to keep going because you never know who might need you tomorrow. So I kept going, and I knew I had to find her grave. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, understanding beginning to dawn. How did you find it? I saw you. Evan said it simply like it was obvious. About a week after she died, I was walking near the main road in Ashland, and I saw this black Harley go by. The loudest bike I'd ever heard. And I remembered Naomi pointing at it once in the diner parking lot saying, "That's my dad, loudest bike in Oregon." So I followed you, stayed way back, hid behind trees and cars, but I followed you all the way to Pinewood Cemetery. Marcus remembered that day, 1 week after the funeral, the first time he'd gone back alone. He'd fallen apart at Lily's grave, had punched the ground until his knuckles bled, had cursed God and the universe, and every random cruel thing that had led to that moment. He'd thought he was alone in his grief. He'd been wrong. I hid behind the evergreen trees. Evan continued, his voice taking on that reverent quality again. I watched you kneel at her grave, and I saw how much pain you were in, and I felt like an intruder, like I had no right to be there. So I waited until you left. And then I walked up to the headstone, and I saw her picture, that photo of her smiling with her front teeth missing, and I just collapsed. I laid there on the ground next to her grave, and I cried until I had nothing left. The image was almost unbearable. Two people grieving the same girl, separated by shame and circumstance, both thinking they had no right to the pain they carried. But then I realized something. Evan's voice grew softer, almost reverent. Nobody else was going to visit Naomi the way she deserved. You came once a week, and that was beautiful. But I could come more. I could make sure she was never alone. So I started visiting her grave whenever I could. I'd leave things I thought she'd like. Paper cranes I learned to fold from a library book. Drawings I made on scraps of paper I found. Little stones that were pretty or unusual. Anything that felt like something she'd smile at. Marcus stared at Evan with new eyes, understanding, flooding through him. All those times he'd come to the cemetery and found small offerings at Lily's grave. Things he'd assumed were from school friends or neighbors. The carefully folded paper birds, the pencil drawings of flowers and suns, the smooth river stones arranged in little patterns. That had been Evan. For 3 years, this homeless boy had been caring for his daughter's grave, had been leaving tokens of love and remembrance, while Marcus had been completely unaware. I always made sure you weren't around, Evan said quietly. I'd watch from a distance, learn your schedule. Sundays in the morning, that was your time. So I'd come other days, early mornings or late afternoons. I'd talk to her sometimes, tell her about my day, about things I'd seen. I'd tell her I was sorry I couldn't protect her, that I wished it had been me instead. Marcus's throat was so tight he could barely speak. And today I messed up. Fresh shame colored Evan's voice. I lost track of time. I was trying to fix the bracelet because I found it a few months ago, half buried near the edge of her plot. I think the rain uncovered it or something. It must have worked its way up from... He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the word grave, couldn't acknowledge the physics of decomposition and earth movement that had brought this artifact to the surface. I've been keeping it safe, cleaning it, and I was going to bury it properly near the headstone where it wouldn't get lost. But then I heard your motorcycle and I panicked and I dropped it. And then you were there. Marcus looked at this boy, this child who'd survived abandonment and homelessness and loss, who'd spent 3 years honor-guarding his daughter's memory in secret, who'd kept vigil over a little girl who'd been the only light in his darkness. Evan wasn't stealing from Lily's grave. He'd been caring for it with the fierce devotion of someone who understood exactly how rare and precious her kind of love had been. And in that moment, kneeling on cold ground beside his daughter's grave, with a trembling homeless boy and an impossible bracelet, Marcus Stone made a decision that would alter both their lives forever. Stay here. Marcus's voice came out steadier than he felt. Don't move. I'll be back. Evan's eyes went wide with terror that maybe this was it. Maybe Marcus was leaving and would never return. Maybe this brief moment of connection was already over. But he nodded and sat down on the cold ground near Lily's headstone, wrapping his arms around his knees, making himself small again. Marcus rode back toward Ashland, with purpose burning in his chest for the first time in 3 years. He stopped at the Maple Street Diner, first asking questions, talking to people who shifted uncomfortably, and admitted yes, they'd seen a homeless kid around. No, they didn't know where he went. One cook finally mentioned seeing the boy heading toward Medford a few days back, said something about the bridges near the old rail line. It took 3 hours of searching, riding up and down service roads, checking under overpasses and behind abandoned buildings. But Marcus had learned patience from 20 years with the Hells Angels, had learned that the things worth finding required time and determination. And Evan was worth finding. Lily had decided that. And Marcus trusted his daughter's judgment more than he trusted anything else in this broken world. The bridge outside Medford was one of those forgotten concrete structures that carried a freight line nobody used anymore, creating a hollow space underneath where the wind howled through like it was angry at the world. And there, in that brutal, cold space where no child should ever have to exist, Marcus found Evan curled into the smallest version of himself possible. A black garbage bag whipped and cracked in the wind, providing almost no protection, but probably the only thing Evan had. Marcus killed the Harley's engine and sat there for a moment, just watching this child try to survive in conditions that would break most grown men. Evan was shivering so violently Marcus could see it from 20 feet away. His small body convulsed with cold, his hands tucked under his armpits, trying to find warmth that didn't exist. The garbage bag had torn in several places, and the wind reached through those tears like cruel fingers stealing whatever body heat Evan had managed to generate. Empty food wrappers littered the space nearby, the kind you find in gas station trash cans. Evan had probably been eating other people's discarded meals just to stay alive. The thought made Marcus's jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. Everything in him wanted to scoop this boy up immediately to get him out of this hellish place right now. But he also knew that sudden movements and loud voices would send Evan running would trigger every survival instinct that had kept him alive this long. So instead, Marcus did something that probably saved both of them. He walked over slowly, his boots crunching on gravel and broken glass, and he sat down on the cold concrete right next to Evan. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, letting Evan know he wasn't alone, that someone had found him and wasn't leaving. Evan's eyes opened slowly, confusion and fear mixing together as he realized Marcus had tracked him down. How did you? But his teeth chattered so hard he couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus reached up and unzipped his leather jacket, the one he'd worn for 15 years, the one with the Hells Angels patch on the back, the one that had been with him through fights and rides and storms and celebrations. He pulled it off his shoulders, feeling the immediate bite of cold air against his arms, and he wrapped that jacket around Evan's trembling frame. The jacket swallowed the boy, hung on him like a tent. But Marcus could see immediate relief in Evan's face as the leather blocked the wind, as the residual warmth from Marcus's body started to seep into Evan's frozen limbs. The boy's breathing began to even out slightly, the violent shaking subsiding to tremors. "My Naomi cared about you." Marcus's voice was low and steady, carrying a weight of absolute certainty. "So I'm going to care too." Evan's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he just stared at Marcus like he'd spoken in a foreign language, like the words didn't make sense in any universe Evan understood. Because in Evan's experience, adults didn't care. Adults yelled or ignored or called the police or told you to move along because you were bad for business. Adults didn't sit down next to you in freezing wind under a forgotten bridge and give you their jacket and make promises about caring. Why the single word held 3 years of abandonment, of sleeping behind dumpsters, of being invisible to everyone who looked right through him. Marcus thought about how to answer. He thought about Lily's fierce little heart, about how she'd seen value in people the world had decided to discard, about how she'd spent her final hours trying to bring warmth to someone who was cold. Because you mattered to her. And anything that mattered to my daughter matters to me. That's not complicated, son. That's just how it is. Evan started crying then, not the scared tears from earlier, but something deeper, something that came from a place that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. These were tears of relief, of disbelief, of a kind of hope so fragile it hurt to feel it. Because what if it disappeared? What if this moment ended and he was alone again, under this bridge with nothing but a garbage bag and brutal wind? Marcus waited until the worst of the crying passed, until Evan's breathing steadied slightly. Then he stood up and held out his hand. "Come on, you're not staying here another minute." Evan looked at Marcus's outstretched hand like it might be a trap, like maybe this was some elaborate, cruel joke and the punchline was coming. But then he looked at Marcus's face, at the absolute steady certainty there, at the lack of pity or disgust or any of the things Evan had learned to recognize in adults who were about to hurt him. And Evan reached up and put his small, frozen hand in Marcus's large, calloused one. Marcus lifted him gently, carefully, like Evan was made of glass that might shatter with rough handling. The boy weighed almost nothing, felt like he was mostly bones and willpower. And Marcus felt rage building in his chest at a system that had allowed this to happen, that had let a child fall so far through the cracks that he ended up sleeping under bridges and eating from trash cans. But he pushed that rage down for now, channeled it into something useful, into the protective instinct that was roaring to life in him for the first time in 3 years. He guided Evan to the Harley, helped him onto the back seat, made sure he was holding on tight. "You ever been on a motorcycle before?" Evan shook his head, his eyes wide. "Just hold on to me and lean with me when we turn. You're safe. I promise." And Marcus realized as he said it that he meant it with every fiber of his being. This boy was safe now. Whatever it took, however long it took, Evan was never going back to sleeping under bridges or behind dumpsters or anywhere else that treated children like they were disposable. They rode through the late afternoon toward the Hells Angels clubhouse, Evan clinging to Marcus's back, probably terrified and exhausted and confused about where they were going, but trusting enough to hold on. And as they pulled into the parking lot, as the clubhouse came into view with nearly 200 Harleys parked outside, like mechanical sentinels standing guard, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He was bringing Lily's friend home. He was finishing what his daughter had started. He was honoring her memory in the only way that mattered, by loving what she had loved, by protecting what she had tried to protect. The clubhouse went silent the moment Marcus walked through the door with Evan at his side. 200 men, tough as nails and harder to impress, turned to look. These were Hell's Angels who'd spent decades earning their patches of men, with beards that reached their chests and tattoos that told stories of brotherhood and blood and roads that stretched into infinity. Men who'd been in bar fights and prison cells, who'd buried brothers and burned bridges, who looked like the kind of people you'd cross the street to avoid. But every single one of them had loved Lily. She'd been the only child who ran freely through their barbecues, weaving between tattooed legs and leather boots, with fearlessness that made them all protective and proud. She'd stuck flower stickers on their helmets when they weren't looking, turning intimidating machines of chrome and steel into mobile gardens. The men had grumbled but never removed the decorations. She'd called them uncle without prompting, just naturally assumed these massive, scary-looking men were family because to her family was whoever showed up and cared. When Lily died, grown men had wept openly at her funeral. Jackson Wright, 6'5", built like a mountain skull, tattoos covering his scalp, had carried her tiny casket with tears streaming down his face. Vincent Cruz, who'd done 15 years in Pelican Bay and never shed a tear through any of it, had broken down completely during the eulogy. The entire chapter wore black armbands for a month. They'd created a memorial wall in the clubhouse with her photos, her drawings, the thank you cards she'd made for birthdays and holidays. Lily had been their collective daughter, their proof that they were more than what the world assumed about them. And now Marcus stood in front of them with a trembling 12-year-old boy wearing his leather jacket like a shield, and the men didn't need explanation. They could read the situation in Marcus's body language, in the protective way he had his hand on the boy's shoulder, in the fierce determination in his eyes that said, this mattered. This was important. This was sacred ground. Jackson Wright moved first. The massive man with skull tattoos and hands that could crush concrete pushed back from the table where he'd been sitting and crossed the room in 3 strides. Evan flinched, tried to shrink behind Marcus, but Jackson crouched down, slowly lowering himself to Evan's eye level. Up close, Jackson's face was a roadmap of violence, scars crisscrossing his features, knuckles permanently swollen from decades of fighting, his presence overwhelming in its intensity. But when he spoke, his voice was low and impossibly gentle. If Lily cared about you, then your family now. That's how this works, kid. That's how this has always worked. Evan's eyes went wide with disbelief, with that same fragile hope Marcus had seen under the bridge. Jackson reached up and touched the side of his bald head, where a faded flower sticker was still barely visible, weathered and peeling but never removed. She put this here 3 years ago. Told me I looked too mean and needed more color in my life. I told her I'd keep it forever. His voice cracked slightly. So if she saw something worth protecting in you, then so do I. Simple as that. Vincent Cruz appeared at Evan's other side, holding a steaming plate piled high with food. Ribs, cornbread, coleslaw, the kind of meal that came from the industrial kitchen the club maintained for their legendary barbecues. Vincent was lean and wiry, with a scar running from temple to jaw and eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. But he set that plate down on the nearest table with surprising gentleness and pulled out a chair. Sit, not a command but an invitation. Eat, you're safe here. Nobody's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to make you leave. Evan looked at Marcus, asking silent permission. Marcus nodded. The boy sat down carefully, like the chair might disappear if he moved too fast, and picked up a fork with shaking hands. The first bite seemed to overwhelm him, like he'd forgotten what real food tasted like. Then he was eating with the desperate hunger of someone who'd gone too long with too little. The room stayed quiet, watching. Then someone started talking in low tones, and gradually the normal sounds of the clubhouse resumed. But everyone remained aware of the boy at the table, everyone paying attention in that peripheral way men do when they want to protect something without making it obvious. Samuel Bishop, the club president, old school, Hell's Angels, who'd been riding since the 60s, approached with his arms crossed over his barrel chest. His white beard and weathered face carried the kind of authority that didn't need announcement because everyone just felt it. We need to talk. Church, now. Marcus hesitated, not wanting to leave Evan alone, but Jackson moved closer to the boy. I got him. He's good. Go. 15 minutes later, the core members of the chapter sat around the scarred wooden table in the back room that served as their official meeting space. Marcus explained everything. Started from finding Evan at the grave and went through the whole story: Lily's secret acts of mercy, the months of feeding and caring for a homeless child the night she died, trying to bring him a blanket, Evan's 3 years of honoring her grave in secret. His voice broke multiple times during the telling, but he pushed through, needed them to understand who this boy was and what he'd meant to Lily. When Marcus finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Samuel spoke. "We vote. Evan stays or Evan goes. Show of hands for taking him in." Every hand went up, every single one. No hesitation, no discussion needed, unanimous. But one member stood up slowly. Brett Davis, newer to the chapter, patched in just 6 months before Lily died. "I'm not saying no." His words came carefully and every eye turned to him. "I'm saying we need to do this right. This kid, he's not just some kid. He's Lily's legacy. We can't just take him in like he's a prospect or a charity case. We need to protect him the way she would have wanted. We need to make him untouchable." The tension that had started to build deflated immediately as understanding spread. Brett wasn't objecting. He was demanding they do better, be better. Samuel nodded slowly. "You're right. So what are you thinking?" "We make him family, not a prospect who's got to earn his way in. Family. Protected family. We clear out the storage room, make it into a proper bedroom. We get him enrolled in school. We make sure he's got everything he needs." Brett paused. "And we make him a vest." "A vest?" someone asked. "A vest," Brett confirmed, "not with prospect on the back. Something else. Something that tells everyone who sees him that he's under our protection, that he matters, that Lily's love for him means something permanent." Jackson's gravelly voice cut through the room. "Sparrow." Everyone turned to look at him. "We call him Sparrow. Kid's small, been through hell, but he's still here, still flying. And sparrows, they're tougher than they look. They survive winters that kill bigger birds." The name settled over the room like it had always been there, like it was inevitable. Samuel banged his fist on the table once. "It's decided then. Evan becomes Sparrow. We clear the storage room tonight. Someone's getting him clothes, school supplies, whatever he needs. Jackson, you handle the vest. Make it right." Marcus felt something in his chest expand, felt warmth spreading through places that had been cold for 3 years. "Thank you," his voice rough with emotion. "All of you. Thank you. Don't thank us." Samuel's tone was firm. "Lily would have expected this from us. We're just living up to what a 10-year-old girl already knew about family." By the time night fell, what had been a forgotten storage space filled with boxes and old motorcycle parts had become a small but genuine bedroom. Warm and clean and waiting. A dozen men had descended with purpose, hauling out years of accumulated junk, sweeping away dust and cobwebs. Someone drove to town and came back with a bed frame, a mattress, sheets, blankets. Others contributed a desk, a lamp, a bookshelf, posters for the walls showing mountains and forests and open roads. Evan stood in the doorway for almost 5 minutes before he could make himself step inside, like crossing that threshold might break whatever spell was making this real. Marcus stood behind him patiently, not pushing, just letting the boy process what he was seeing. When Evan finally stepped inside, his legs seemed unsteady, like the ground wasn't quite solid. He reached out and touched the blanket on the bed with trembling fingers, then pulled his hand back quickly as if he'd been burned. "This is mine." A whisper so small Marcus had to strain to hear it. "It's yours, for as long as you want it. No conditions, no strings. Just yours." Evan sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, testing it. The mattress gave slightly under his weight in that perfect way good mattresses do. He pressed his hands into it, feeling the softness, the reality of it. Then he looked up at Marcus, with eyes swimming with tears he was trying desperately not to shed. "I haven't slept in a real bed in almost 4 years." That night, Marcus tucked Evan into bed for the first time, pulling the blankets up around the boy's thin shoulders, making sure he was warm, making sure he was comfortable. Being a father again for the first time since the night Lily died. His hands remembered the motions, even though his heart had forgotten how to feel them. Evan looked up at him in the dim light from the hallway. "Why would you do this for me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his throat tight with emotion. "Because Lily saw something in you worth saving. And she was never wrong about people. Not once. If my daughter thought you deserved love and protection and a chance at a real life, then that's the truth. That's just the truth, son." Evan's face crumpled, and he turned into the pillow, his small body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for hours, maybe for years. Marcus didn't leave. He stayed there on the edge of that bed, his hand on Evan's back, letting the boy cry out everything he'd been carrying alone for so long. And somewhere in that small room in a Hells Angels clubhouse, two broken people found the first real comfort either of them had felt since the night a 10-year-old girl died trying to bring a blanket to a boy who was cold. 3 days later, Marcus woke Evan gently just after dawn and told him they were going somewhere important. The boy dressed quietly in his new clothes and followed Marcus out to the Harley without asking questions. He'd learned in those 3 days that Marcus didn't do anything without purpose, that every action carried weight and meaning. At the cemetery, Evan stopped several feet from Lily's grave, suddenly unsure. Marcus seemed to sense his hesitation. She'd want you here. She'd want to know you're okay. Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out the leather bracelet. He'd been keeping it safe in his new room, but he'd known since the moment he got the room that it didn't belong there. It belonged here, returned to the girl who'd worn it with such pride. He walked forward slowly and knelt down in front of the granite headstone with her smiling photo. He placed the bracelet gently on top of the stone, his hands trembling so badly he almost dropped it. Then words started coming out of him. Words he hadn't planned, words that had been building for 3 years. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." His voice broke immediately. "I'm sorry you died trying to help me. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough or smart enough or good enough to keep you safe. You were the only person who ever saw me, who ever cared if I was cold or hungry or scared. And I couldn't do anything to save you." The sobs took him, then wrenching themselves out of his chest with violence that bent him forward until his forehead touched the cold granite. 3 years of guilt and grief and loss poured out of this 12-year-old boy who'd been carrying the weight of a death that was never his responsibility, who'd been punishing himself for surviving when the only person who'd ever loved him hadn't. Marcus knelt beside him, his own vision blurring with tears, and he placed a strong hand on Evan's shoulder. The touch was firm and grounding. "Son." Marcus's voice was thick with emotion but steady with certainty. "She protected you. That's what she did. That's who she was. She saw someone who needed help, and she helped them because that's what her heart told her to do. This wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. It was just the universe being cruel and random and terrible. But it wasn't because of you." Evan lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, his eyes desperate for absolution he didn't think he deserved. "If you hadn't been there, she would have found someone else to help." Marcus interrupted gently. "That was Lily. That was her gift and her curse. She couldn't walk past suffering without trying to fix it. She got that stubborn compassion from somewhere deep, and nothing was going to change that about her. You didn't cause this, Evan. You were just the recipient of her love. And that's not a crime. That's not something to apologize for." Marcus's own tears were falling, now dropping onto the ground beside Lily's grave, mixing with Evan's. "And now we protect each other." That's what she'd want. She'd want us to take care of each other, to make sure neither of us is alone in this grief, to build something good out of all this terrible loss. That's how we honor her son. Not by drowning in guilt, but by living the way she tried to teach us to live. By seeing people. By caring when the world says we shouldn't. By being family to each other. They knelt there together under the tall Oregon pines, surrounded by morning mist and the sound of wind moving through branches. And they cried for the girl they'd both loved, for the innocence the world had stolen, for the future that would never happen. But underneath that grief, something else was growing: understanding, acceptance, the beginning of healing that neither of them had thought possible. When they finally stood, Marcus kept his hand on Evan's shoulder as they walked back to the Harley. The morning sun was beginning to burn through the fish, turning everything golden. Behind them, Lily's grave stood covered in paper cranes and stones, and love from a boy who'd survived because she'd decided he was worth saving. They were halfway to the parking lot when Marcus felt his phone vibrate. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and felt his blood run cold. A registered letter notification from Oregon Department of Human Services. The subject line was visible, even in the preview: "Investigation Notice, Unlawful Custody of Minor." Marcus opened the full email with shaking hands. The investigator's name jumped out at him. Margaret Holloway, Senior Agent, Child Protective Services. A meeting was scheduled for 1 week from today. The email listed potential outcomes, including immediate removal of the child to state custody pending investigation. Evan noticed Marcus had stopped walking. "What's wrong, Marcus?" Looked at this boy who'd finally found safety after years of suffering, who'd finally found warmth after being cold alone, who'd finally found family after being invisible. And he thought about Lily, about her fierce determination, about how she never gave up on things that mattered. Nothing's wrong, Marcus's voice was steady even though his heart was pounding. But we've got a fight ahead of us, and we're going to win it together, because that's what family did. They fought for each other. They showed up when it mattered. They proved the world wrong about who deserved love and protection and second chances. Marcus Stone had been numb for 3 years, but standing there with Evan with Sparrow, he felt something ignite in his chest that he thought had died with his daughter. Purpose, hope, the will to fight. Lily had started something, and Marcus was going to finish it. The Department of Human Services building sat on the corner of 4th and Main in downtown Ashland like a monument to bureaucratic indifference. Gray concrete walls, small windows that didn't open, fluorescent lights that flickered with institutional apathy. Marcus parked the Harley 2 blocks away, straightened his leather vest, and tried to ignore the way his hands wanted to shake. Samuel Bishop stood beside him, adjusting his own vest, the club president's presence steady and grounding. Jackson Wright leaned against his bike nearby, arms crossed, silent support radiating from his massive frame. Ellen Reeves waited for them on the steps. The lawyer was 52, sharp-eyed, with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. She'd represented club members before, understood that leather and patches didn't automatically mean criminal, that family came in forms the state didn't always recognize. She carried a leather briefcase stuffed with documentation Marcus had spent the past week gathering. Margaret Holloway's going to be tough. Ellen's voice was low, professional. 25 years with CPS. She's seen every kind of abuse, every manipulation tactic. She won't be impressed by emotion or good intentions. We need to show her concrete evidence that Evan is thriving, that this environment is stable, that you're capable of providing what he needs. Marcus nodded, throat tight. Evan had stayed at the clubhouse with Vincent, who'd promised to keep the boy distracted with cooking lessons. The thought of Evan's face when Marcus had explained where he was going, the fear that had flashed across those eyes, the way his voice had gone small, asking if they were going to take him away, that memory sat in Marcus's chest like a stone. Inside the building smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Their footsteps echoed on linoleum floors as a receptionist directed them to conference room C on the 3rd floor. The room was exactly what Marcus expected. Bare walls, on table, uncomfortable chairs designed to make people want to leave quickly. Margaret Holloway already sat at the head of the table, a stack of folders in front of her reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up as they entered, and Marcus saw her expression shift, subtle but unmistakable, when she took in the leather vests, the patches, the visible tattoos on Jackson's neck. Judgment immediate and automatic, the kind that came from years of associating certain appearances with certain outcomes. "Mr. Stone," her voice was clipped, professional. She gestured to the chairs across from her. "Please sit." Marcus sat. Samuel and Jackson flanked him. Ellen took the chair closest to Margaret, setting her briefcase on the table with a soft thud that said she was prepared for battle. "I'll be direct." Margaret folded her hands on top of her files. "This department received an anonymous report that a minor child was residing in a Hells Angels clubhouse under the custody of an individual with no legal guardianship rights, no background checks, no home study. The report expressed concern for the child's safety, given the documented history of criminal activity associated with motorcycle clubs." She paused, letting that sink in. "My job is to ensure children are in safe, stable environments, not environments where they might be exposed to violence, illegal activity, or inappropriate influences. So I need you to help me understand why I shouldn't remove Evan immediately and place him in foster care." The words hung in the air like a threat. Marcus felt rage building in his chest but forced it down. Getting angry would only confirm whatever Margaret had already decided about men who wore leather and rode Harleys. Ellen spoke first, her tone measured and calm. "So, Holloway, we appreciate your concern for Evan's welfare. That's exactly what Mr. Stone shares, which is why we've prepared comprehensive documentation of Evan's current situation versus his previous circumstances." She opened her briefcase and began laying out papers. School enrollment forms showing Evan registered at Ashland Middle School. Medical records from a full checkup Vincent had arranged noting improved nutrition and no signs of abuse. A letter from Dr. Sarah Lynn, the therapist Evan had been seeing twice a week, describing his remarkable progress in processing trauma. Margaret picked up each document, scanning them with practiced efficiency. Her expression remained neutral, but Marcus watched her eyes, saw the moment she registered that this wasn't some hasty attempt to hide neglect. This was organized, thorough, legitimate. This is impressive paperwork. Margaret set down the medical file. But documents don't tell me about daily life. They don't tell me what this child is exposed to, what he witnesses, what happens behind closed doors. Then come see for yourself. Samuel's voice was gravelly but respectful. Do a home visit, interview Evan privately, check every corner of the clubhouse. We've got nothing to hide. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. You're inviting a CPS investigation. We're inviting you to see the truth. Marcus found his voice kept it steady. Evan's been invisible for 3 years, sleeping behind dumpsters, eating from trash cans. 4 different foster homes before that, each one worse than the last. The system failed him. We didn't. Margaret's expression hardened. The system has limited resources and imperfect people, Mr. Stone. But it exists to protect children. Your daughter's kindness to this boy is admirable. But kindness doesn't qualify someone to raise a traumatized child. My daughter saw something in him worth saving. Marcus leaned forward slightly. She spent her last hours alive trying to keep him warm. And now you're telling me the right thing to do is put him back in the same system that made him run in the first place. I'm telling you that good intentions aren't enough. Margaret's voice stayed level, but Marcus heard steel underneath. Children need structure, professional oversight, people trained in trauma care. Evan's getting all of that, Ellen interjected smoothly. Therapy twice a week, tutoring from Mr. Bishop, who was a high school teacher for 20 years. Medical care, nutrition, and most importantly, stability. For the first time in 3 years, this child knows where he'll sleep tonight, knows he'll eat, knows he's wanted. You remove him from that and put him back in the system, and you're telling him the world still doesn't see him. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying each of them in turn. Finally, she picked up her pen. Home visit, Thursday at 10 a.m. I'll inspect the living conditions, interview Evan privately, and speak with anyone else who interacts with him regularly. She looked directly at Marcus. And Mr. Stone, I'll be conducting a thorough background check. Any arrests, any charges, any history I should know about now? Marcus's jaw tightened. Bar fight 6 years ago, charges dropped, speeding tickets. Nothing involving children, nothing violent in the past decade. Margaret made a note. I'll verify that. She closed her folder with finality. This meeting is concluded. I'll see you Thursday. Outside the building, Marcus sucked in cold air like he'd been drowning. His hands shook now that the adrenaline was draining away, leaving just exhaustion and fear in its wake. She's not convinced. His voice came out rough. She's going to take him. She's doing her job. Ellen's tone was pragmatic. And honestly, she should be skeptical. But we've got Thursday to show her Evan's thriving. Make the clubhouse presentable. Have Evan ready to talk honestly. And Marcus, she turned to face him, fully prepare yourself for the possibility that Thursday might not go our way. We might have to fight this in court. Then we fight. Samuel's voice brooked no argument. That kid's one of ours now. We don't abandon family. Jackson nodded silent agreement, his scarred face set with determination. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, gratitude mixed with grief, mixed with fierce, protective love for these men who'd decided a homeless boy mattered enough to go to war with the state. The ride back to the clubhouse felt longer than it should have. When Marcus walked through the door, he found Evan in the kitchen, with Vincent carefully chopping vegetables while the older man supervised. The boy looked up immediately, eyes searching Marcus's face for answers. How did it go? Marcus crossed the room and knelt down so he was eye level with Evan. It went okay. She's coming Thursday to visit. To see where you live, to talk to you. She wants to make sure you're safe. Evan's knife hand trembled slightly. What if she decides I'm not? What if she takes me away? Then we'll appeal. We'll fight. Marcus kept his voice firm. Certain, but Evan, you need to understand something. She's going to ask you questions about living here, about what you've seen, what people say, if anyone's hurt you or scared you. And you need to tell her the truth. All of it, even the parts you think might sound bad. But what if the truth isn't good enough? Evan's voice cracked. What if she thinks I don't belong here? Vincent set down his own knife and placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. Kid, the truth is you are dying out there. Slowly but dying, cold and hungry and alone. and now you're not. That's the truth that matters. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. The clubhouse underwent a transformation that would have been comical if the stakes weren't so high. Members scrubbed floors and walls, took down controversial posters, moved anything that might be construed as weapon adjacent to locked storage. The bar area got covered with a tablecloth and became a dining space. Vincent organized the kitchen with the precision of a military operation, labeling shelves with meal plans and nutritional information. Evan's room received special attention. Marcus and Jackson spent hours organizing his books, hanging his drawings on the walls in neat frames, making sure everything looked intentional and cared for rather than thrown together. They placed a photo of Lily on Evan's desk. Marcus had given the boy permission to keep it there to honor the girl who'd saved him. Wednesday night, the evening before the visit, Evan couldn't sleep. Marcus found him sitting on his bed at 2 in the morning, knees pulled to his chest, staring at nothing. Marcus sat down beside him, the mattress dipping under his weight. "Talk to me. I keep thinking about the foster homes." Evan's voice was barely audible. "The first one, Mr. Patterson used to yell all the time. Not at me specifically, just at the world. His wife never said anything. Just let him rage. I felt like I was always waiting for an explosion." He paused, gathering words like they cost something to speak. "The second one, Mrs. Chen, she meant well, but she had 6 other kids. I was just a number. She'd forget my name sometimes. Call me by other kids' names. I know she was overwhelmed, but it made me feel like I could disappear and no one would notice. The third one," Evan's voice got quieter, "Mr. and Mrs. Bradley. They took the state money and spent it on themselves. We ate cereal for dinner most nights. I had one pair of jeans that I washed in the sink. When I asked for new shoes, they said I should be grateful for what I had." "What about the fourth?" Marcus asked gently. Evan flinched. "Mr. Kowalski. He was the worst. He'd lock me in the closet when I did something wrong. Not for hours, just 30 minutes an hour. But in the dark, it felt like forever. He said I needed to learn consequences. His wife knew, but she never stopped him." Marcus felt fury building hot and righteous at every adult who'd failed this child. "How long were you there?" 3 months. "Then I ran." Evan looked at Marcus with eyes that held too much knowledge. "I knew if I went back, they'd just move me again. To a 5th home, a 6th. I'd always be the kid nobody really wanted, the one taking up space. So I decided I'd rather be invisible on my own terms." The logic was heartbreaking and perfect. Marcus reached out slowly and put his arm around Evan's shoulders. "You're not invisible anymore. And you're not just taking up space. You belong here. Not because we're good people doing charity, but because Lily chose you and we choose what she chose. That's how family works. But what if Miss Holloway doesn't see it that way? What if, to her, I'm just another case file, another kid who needs to be processed through the system? Then you tell her exactly what you told me." Marcus's voice was firm. "You tell her about the Pattersons' rage and the Chen's forgetfulness and the Bradleys' neglect in Kowalski's closet. You tell her what it felt like to be invisible, and then you tell her what it feels like to be seen." Thursday morning arrived too fast. Margaret Holloway pulled up in a silver sedan at exactly 10 a.m., accompanied by a younger woman she introduced as her assistant, Jennifer Park. Both women wore professional attire and expressions of careful neutrality as they surveyed the line of motorcycles parked outside the clubhouse. "Mr. Stone." Margaret shook his hand with a grip that was firm and evaluating. "Shall we begin?" The tour started with common areas. Margaret took notes on everything: the cleanliness, the kitchen setup, the bookshelves Vincent had stocked with age-appropriate reading material. She inspected the bathroom, checking for mold and proper supplies. She examined the common room where members gathered, asking about what activities happened there, who had access, what hours children might be present. Samuel answered most questions with calm professionalism, explaining the club's structure, their charity work, their volunteer programs with local veterans. He showed her awards from the community, thank you letters from families they'd helped, documentation of their toy drives and food pantry donations. Margaret's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught moments where her eyebrows rose slightly, surprise quickly suppressed. Whatever she'd expected, this organized demonstration of community involvement wasn't it. Evan's room came next. Marcus stood in the doorway while Margaret and Jennifer entered, giving them space to inspect. Margaret ran her hand over the bed linens, checked the closet, examined the books on the shelf. She paused at Lily's photo on the desk. Your daughter, yeah, Marcus's throat tightened. She died at 3.5 years ago. Car accident. She and Evan were friends. Margaret picked up one of Evan's drawings from the desk, a detailed pencil sketch of a motorcycle. He drew this. He's been teaching himself, Vincent said quietly from behind Marcus. Kid's got real talent. We're trying to encourage it. Margaret set the drawing down carefully and turned to Marcus. I'd like to interview Evan now, privately. Marcus's stomach clenched, but he nodded. Evan had been waiting in the kitchen, probably terrified. Marcus went to get him, found the boy sitting at the table with his hands folded, leg bouncing with nervous energy. She wants to talk to you alone. Marcus crouched down. Remember what we discussed? Truth. All of it. Evan nodded, stood on shaky legs. Marcus wanted to hug him, to promise it would be okay, but he knew Margaret would be watching through the doorway. So he just squeezed Evan's shoulder once and watched the boy walk toward his room where Margaret waited. The door closed. 20 minutes passed like 20 hours. Marcus paced the common room while Samuel and Vincent sat in tense silence. Jackson had positioned himself near the front door, arms crossed, standing guard, even though there was nothing to guard against except possibility and bureaucracy. When the door finally opened, Evan emerged first, his eyes red, but his shoulders straight. Margaret followed, her expression unreadable. She made more notes in her folder while Evan went to stand next to Marcus, close enough that their arms touched. I'd like to speak with Mr. Cruz. Margaret looked at Vincent. You're the primary meal provider. Vincent nodded and followed her to the kitchen. Through the doorway, Marcus could see them talking. Vincent gesturing to the organized pantry, explaining meal schedules and nutrition requirements with the earnestness of someone who genuinely cared. More notes in Margaret's folder. More careful neutrality on her face. She interviewed Samuel next, then Jackson. Each conversation lasted 10 to 15 minutes. Each time, Margaret's expression gave nothing away. Finally, she closed her folder and addressed the room. I've seen what I needed to see today. I'll be submitting my report to the court within 2 weeks. You'll receive notification of my recommendation and the next steps in this process. What does that mean? Marcus couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Does he stay or not? Margaret's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw something other than professional distance. Maybe sympathy, maybe respect. Something human underneath the bureaucratic armor. That's not a decision I can make unilaterally, Mr. Stone. But I can tell you this. She glanced at Evan. I've interviewed dozens of children in foster care. Most of them give me rehearsed answers, say what they think I want to hear. This child, she gestured to Evan, spoke from the heart. He told me things that were hard to say, and he told me what it feels like to finally be seen. She picked up her briefcase. My report will reflect everything I observed today. The cleanliness, the organization, the evidence of stability. And it will reflect that sometimes family looks different than the state manual assumes. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Mr. Stone, the system I work for is imperfect. It fails children every single day through no one's malice, but through sheer overwhelm. We have too many kids and not enough good homes. She looked at Evan again. If this child is thriving here, if he's safe and loved and given opportunities to heal, then my job isn't to disrupt that. My job is to document it and recommend accordingly. She left without another word. The door closed behind her and the room exhaled collectively. Evan's voice came out small. Did I do okay? You did perfect. Marcus pulled him into a hug, felt the boy's thin frame trembling. You were so brave. She asked me about the closet. Evan's words were muffled against Marcus's shoulder. About Mr. Kowalski. I told her everything. About being locked in the dark, about running away, about sleeping behind the dumpster. And then she asked me what changed. What did you tell her? That Lily saw me when I was invisible? And now everyone here sees me too. Evan pulled back, looking up at Marcus with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in days. I told her I'd rather die than go back to being invisible. The words hit Marcus like a punch. This child would rather die than lose what they'd built here. The stakes suddenly felt heavier than any legal battle. Heavier than the letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after Margaret Holloway's visit. Marcus was in the garage teaching Evan how to change spark plugs when Vincent appeared in the doorway holding a white envelope with the Department of Human Services logo in the corner. His expression gave nothing away, but the tightness around his eyes said everything. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, feeling his heart kick against his ribs. Evan noticed immediately, straightening from where he'd been bent over the motorcycle engine, grease smudged across his forehead. Is that Marcus took the envelope, turned it over in his hands. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. Samuel appeared behind Vincent, then Jackson, then more members filtering in from other parts of the clubhouse until a dozen men stood in the garage watching Marcus hold their collective future. Open it! Samuel's voice was steady, but Marcus heard the tension underneath. The paper tore with a sound that seemed too loud. Marcus unfolded the page's eyes, scanning past legal letterhead and case numbers to find the words that mattered. His hands started shaking before he reached the third paragraph. What does it say? Evan's voice cracked. Marcus looked up, his vision blurring. She's recommending temporary custody. 6 months supervised. If Evan maintains school attendance, continues therapy, shows continued improvement. He couldn't finish. Evan made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob and launched himself at Marcus' arms wrapping around his waist. Marcus dropped the letter and caught him, held him tight, while the boy shook with relief so profound it bordered on pain. The garage erupted, men shouting, clapping each other on shoulders, Jackson letting out a whoop that echoed off concrete walls. Vincent disappeared and came back minutes later with bottles of root beer, passing them around like champagne, because Evan was there and they weren't celebrating with anything stronger. Samuel picked up the fallen letter, read through it carefully. There's conditions, monthly check-ins with CPS, continued enrollment in the school with passing grades, regular therapy sessions, home visits without notice. We'll meet every single one. Marcus's voice was fierce, certain. Whatever it takes. That night, the clubhouse threw an impromptu celebration. Nothing elaborate. Vincent made his famous chili, someone brought out speakers and played music, and 24 Hells Angels gathered in the common room to mark the moment a homeless boy officially became one of their own. Evan sat in the center of it all, overwhelmed and happy, accepting congratulations from men whose names he was still learning, men who clapped his shoulder and ruffled his hair, and treated him like he'd always belonged. Jackson appeared with a box wrapped in newspaper. Been working on this. Figured we'd need it eventually. Evan opened it carefully and pulled out a leather vest sized perfectly for his thin frame. On the back, embroidered in silver thread sparrow. Below it, smaller, protected by Hell's Angels, Ashland. Chapter. The room went quiet. Evan stared at the vest, running his fingers over the stitching, and when he looked up, tears streamed down his face unchecked. This means your family. Jackson's gravelly voice carried weight. Not because of blood. Because you earned it. Because Lily chose you, and we choose what she chose. Evan pulled the vest on over his t-shirt. It settled onto his shoulders like it had been waiting for him his whole life. The men erupted in applause, and Evan stood there in the center of their circle, visible and claimed and belonging for the first time in memory. Marcus watched from the edge of the room, throat tight with emotion that mixed grief and joy in equal measure. Lily should be here for this. Should see what her kindness had created. How her decision to feed a hungry child had rippled outward into something larger than either of them. But she wasn't here. Would never be here. And Marcus had to carry both truths simultaneously, the loss of his daughter and the gift she'd left behind. That night, after the celebration wound down and members drifted home, or to their bunks, Marcus found Evan in his room, staring at the vest where it hung on the back of his door. The boy hadn't taken it off for hours, had worn it through dinner and cleanup, reluctant to let it leave his body. You okay? Marcus leaned against the doorframe. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up. Evan's voice was soft. That this is just a really good dream, and I'll open my eyes and I'll be back under the bridge with just a garbage bag in the wind. This is real. Marcus crossed the room, sat on the edge of Evan's bed. All of it. The vest, the room, the family. Real. Evan turned to face him, expression serious beyond his 12 years. What happens if I mess up, if I get bad grades or get in trouble at school? Do I lose all of this? The question revealed so much fear underneath the surface calm. Evan still didn't trust permanence, still expected love to be conditional, still believed he was one mistake away from being invisible again. Listen to me. Marcus made sure Evan was looking at him. You're going to mess up. That's part of being a kid. Maybe you'll fail a test or skip homework or get in an argument with someone. And when that happens, we'll deal with it together. We'll figure out what went wrong and how to fix it. But messing up doesn't mean you stop being family. Family means we stick around through the hard parts, even if Ms. Holloway comes back. Even then, we made a promise to Lillian. We made a promise to you. We don't break our promises. Evan nodded slowly, wanting to believe but still learning how. Marcus stood ruffled the boy's hair in a gesture that was becoming familiar between them. Get some sleep. First day back at school tomorrow. Ashland Middle School loomed larger than it should have when Marcus dropped Evan off the next morning. The building was standard institutional architecture, brick and concrete narrow windows, a flag hanging limp in windless air. Kids streamed through the front doors in clusters, laughing and shoving each other, performing the social rituals of 7th grade with the confidence of people who knew where they belonged. Evan climbed off the back of the Harley, adjusting his backpack straps. He'd worn the Sparrow vest over his hoodie, despite Marcus suggesting maybe he should ease into school without broadcasting his connection to the Hells Angels. But Evan had been firm. This was who he was now, and he wasn't hiding it. You've got my number if you need anything. Evan nodded, jaw set with determination that didn't quite hide the nerves underneath. Marcus watched him walk toward the building, noting how other kids stared at the vest, how whispers followed in Evan's wake. This was going to be harder than the boy expected. The call came 3 hours later. Marcus was at the clubhouse going over supply orders with Samuel when his phone buzzed. Unknown number but local area code. He answered with a sense of dread already building. Mr. Stone, this is Principal Davidson at Ashland Middle School. We've had an incident involving Evan, and I need you to come pick him up immediately. Marcus was on his bike 5 minutes later. The ride to school felt interminable, even though it only took 10 minutes. Principal Davidson met him in the front office, a thin woman in her 50s with gray hair, pulled back severely, lips pressed in a line that suggested disappointment was her default expression. She led Marcus to her office without preamble. Evan sat in a chair outside, head down, shoulders hunched. Blood crusted under his nose and his knuckles were scraped raw. Another boy sat 3 chairs away with a split lip and the beginnings of a black eye, flanked by parents who looked at Marcus with open hostility when he passed. Inside Davidson's office, Marcus remained standing, arms crossed, waiting. Evan got into a physical altercation with Troy Brennan during lunch period. Davidson's tone was clipped professional disapproval. Multiple witnesses report Troy made comments about Evan's vest and living situation. Evan responded verbally at first, but when Troy continued, Evan threw the first punch. Marcus's jaw tightened. What did Troy say exactly? Davidson consulted her notes. According to witnesses, Troy called Evan's guardian a criminal and suggested Evan would end up in jail like his biker family. He also made crude comments about Evan not having real parents. And what's Troy's consequence? Both boys are suspended for 3 days per our zero-tolerance fighting policy. Davidson met his eyes. However, I need to be frank with you, Mr. Stone. Evan's living situation has raised concerns among some parents. They've expressed worry about having a child associated with the Hells Angels in school with their kids. This incident doesn't help. Marcus felt anger burning hot in his chest but forced his voice to stay level. So Evan gets verbally harassed about being homeless, and when he defends himself, he's the problem. He threw the first punch. Davidson's expression didn't change. We can't have students resolving conflicts with violence regardless of provocation. Did anyone intervene when Troy was verbally attacking him? Davidson hesitated. Teachers can't monitor every conversation during lunch period. Right. Marcus turned toward the door. So Evan gets punished for standing up for himself when no adult protected him. Got it. Outside, Evan looked up with eyes full of shame and fear. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know this might... We're going home. Marcus kept his voice gentle despite the rage still burning under his skin. Let's talk there. The ride back was silent. Evan held on tight, face pressed against Marcus's back, and Marcus could feel the boy shaking, whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. At the clubhouse, Vincent took one look at Evan's face and immediately started making hot chocolate, while Samuel cleared the common room to give them privacy. Marcus sat Evan down at the table, pulled up a chair across from him. Tell me what happened. All of it. Evan's words came haltingly at first, then faster as the dam broke. Troy had been watching him all morning, making comments just loud enough for Evan to hear, calling the vest a gang uniform, saying Marcus was probably a drug dealer, saying Evan would end up just like his criminal biker family in prison or dead. Evan had tried to ignore it the way Marcus had taught him, had tried to walk away. But then Troy had said something that cut deeper. He said Lily probably killed herself to get away from trash like me, that she'd rather be dead than have someone like me as a friend. Marcus felt something cold and furious settle in his chest, and that's when you hit him. Evan nodded miserably. I know you said to walk away from fights. I know you said violence doesn't solve anything, but he was talking about Lily and I couldn't let him. Marcus held up a hand, stopping the flow of words. Evan, look at me. The boy raised his eyes, expecting anger or disappointment. What Troy said about Lily was evil, cruel, designed to hurt you in the deepest way possible. Marcus's voice was firm, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you should have just taken it, that you should have let him trash the memory of the person who saved your life. But you said I know what I said, Marcus leaned forward. And I still believe violence should be the last resort. But son, there's a difference between starting a fight and finishing one. There's a difference between being a bully and defending something sacred. So I'm not in trouble. You're suspended for 3 days. That's consequence enough. Marcus kept his eyes locked on Evans. But I'm not disappointed in you for standing up for Lily. I'm proud of you for knowing some things are worth fighting for. Relief flooded Evans' face so completely he nearly crumpled. I thought you'd be angry. I thought you'd think I wasn't worth keeping. The words revealed everything Evans' deepest fear, that love was performance-based, that one mistake would erase his place in this family. Marcus reached across the table and gripped Evans' shoulder. Let me be crystal clear. You could fail every class break, every rule, make every mistake a kid can make, and you'd still be my son. You'd still belong here. You'd still be Sparrow. Family doesn't disappear because you're imperfect. That's literally the point of family. Evan's face crumpled and he started crying. Not the quiet tears of earlier, but full-body that had been building since the fight, maybe building since long before that. Marcus came around the table and pulled him into a hug, let him cry it out against his shoulder, while Vincent quietly set down mugs of hot chocolate and slipped away. When the crying finally subsided, Evan pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve. What about Troy? Won't this make it worse, maybe? Marcus handed him a napkin. Or maybe Troy learned that you're not someone to mess with. Either way, we'll deal with whatever comes next. What came next arrived 2 days later in the form of Troy Brennan, standing at the clubhouse door, looking terrified and desperate in equal measure. Jackson answered the knock, took one look at the kid with the fading black eye and split lip, and called for Marcus. Troy shifted from foot to foot on the doorstep, eyes darting nervously at the motorcycles parked around him like mechanical predators. His face was a roadmap of recent violence, not just the damage Evan had inflicted, but older bruises turning yellow-green, a cut above his eyebrow that was healing poorly. Mr. Stone, the boy's voice cracked. Can I talk to you? Marcus studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in. Troy followed Marcus to the common room, sitting on the edge of a chair like he expected to be thrown out any second. Jackson leaned against the wall nearby, arms crossed, silent presence that managed to be both protective and vaguely threatening. What do you want, Troy? The boy's hands twisted in his lap. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what I said about Lily, about Evan. It was really messed up and I didn't mean it. Why did you say it then? Troy's face flushed with shame. Because I'm angry. Because everything in my life is terrible and taking it out on someone else made me feel less powerless for like 5 seconds. Marcus sat down across from him, gestured for Jackson to ease off slightly. Tell me about terrible. The story came out in fits and starts. Troy's mom had died when he was 8, cancer, slow and painful. His dad had fallen apart afterward, started drinking, couldn't hold a job. Social services had taken Troy 2 years ago, placed him with the Mitchells, a foster family that looked perfect on paper. Mr. Mitchell has rules. Troy's voice went flat, empty. Break a rule and you get locked in the basement. No light, no bathroom, sometimes 4 hours. He says it builds character. The words landed like stones. Marcus felt fury building, but kept his expression neutral. Does your caseworker know? Troy laughed bitterly. I told her once. She said Mr. Mitchell denied it, and I was probably acting out for attention. She said if I kept making accusations, I'd be moved to a group home, and those are way worse. Marcus exchanged a glance with Jackson, whose jaw had gone tight with barely contained rage. Why come here? Because I saw the news story. Troy met Marcus's eyes. About you fighting to keep Evan, about CPS investigating, and you still not giving up. And I thought maybe he couldn't finish, but Marcus understood. This 14-year-old boy who'd lashed out at Evan had done it because he was drowning and watching someone else get rescued felt unbearable. You shouldn't be in that house, Marcus's voice was firm. But I can't just pull you out. That's kidnapping. We have to do this right. Troy's face crumpled with disappointment that tried to hide behind bravado. Right. Forget I came here. He started to stand, but Marcus stopped him. I said we have to do it right. I didn't say we weren't going to do it. Within an hour, Ellen Reeves was at the clubhouse listening to Troy's story and taking notes with grim efficiency. Within 2 hours, she'd filed an emergency report with CPS naming Troy's allegations and requesting immediate investigation. Within 4 hours, Margaret Holloway herself showed up at the clubhouse looking exhausted and furious. She sat across from Troy in Samuel's office while Marcus and Ellen waited outside. The interview lasted 90 minutes. When the door opened, Margaret's expression was carved from stone. I'm removing Troy from the Mitchell home tonight. She looked at Marcus. I'll need temporary emergency placement while we investigate. Standard protocol would be a group home, but those are all full. She paused, something shifting in her expression. Unless you're willing to take him for 72 hours while I arrange alternatives. Marcus didn't hesitate. He can stay. Margaret's eyebrows rose. You understand this would be official. I'd need to inspect his sleeping arrangements, ensure adequate supervision, file paperwork. We've got a spare room. We've got people who care. That's more than he has now. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then nodded sharply. I'll be back tomorrow to check in. And Mr. Stone, her voice softened almost imperceptibly. Thank you. That night, two boys sat at the clubhouse dinner table eating Vincent's pot roast, while a dozen Hells Angels treated them like they'd always been there. Troy was quiet, overwhelmed, flinching at sudden movements and loud voices. But when Jackson asked him about school and Vincent offered him seconds without making a big deal of it, something in the boy's shoulders began to relax. Evan watched Troy with complicated emotions crossing his face, resentment mixed with understanding, anger mixed with empathy. After dinner, when Troy had been shown to a spare room and left to settle in, Evan found Marcus in the garage. Why are we helping him? Evan's voice held genuine confusion. He was terrible to me, because he's drowning just like you were. Marcus set down the wrench he'd been holding, and because Lily would have helped him too even after he said those awful things. That's what she taught us. You help people who need it, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. But what if he's mean again, then we deal with it. Marcus met Evan's eyes, but right now he's a scared kid in a bad situation who needs someone to see him. Sound familiar? Understanding dawned slowly across Evan's face. You're saying I'm saying you get to decide how you treat him. But I'm also saying you know better than anyone what it feels like to be where he is. 3 days later, Margaret found Troy a placement with a vetted foster family 2 towns over. Older couple experienced with trauma, no other kids in the home. Troy left with the bag of clothes Vincent had bought him and contact information for a therapist Ellen had recommended. At the door, he turned back to Marcus. Why did you do this? His voice was raw with confusion. I was horrible to your kid because my daughter taught me that people are worth more than their worst moments. Marcus put a hand on Troy's shoulder. You messed up. You apologized. You get a chance to be better now. Don't waste it. Troy nodded, throat working with emotion he couldn't quite voice. Then he did something unexpected. He turned to Evan, who stood nearby watching. I'm sorry, not the performative apology from before, but something real and painful. What I said about Lily, there's no excuse for that. I was wrong. Evan was quiet for a moment, then stepped forward and held out his hand. Troy took it, and they shook with the awkwardness of 2 kids learning how to navigate complicated emotions without a script. October 14th arrived with the weight of 4 years pressing down on it. Marcus woke before dawn as he had every anniversary since the accident, but this year Evan was already awake when Marcus emerged from his room. The boy sat at the kitchen table wearing his Sparrow vest over a black t-shirt, 2 travel mugs of coffee already prepared. Couldn't sleep. Marcus's voice was rough with emotion he'd been holding back for days. Wanted to come with you, if that's okay. They rode to Pinewood Cemetery in pre-dawn darkness, the Harley's engine the only sound in sleeping Ashland. Behind them, the rumble of other engines grew. Samuel and Jackson and Vincent and more, until 200 motorcycles formed a procession through empty streets toward the cemetery where a 10-year-old girl rested. The cemetery gate stood open as if expecting them. Marcus and Evan led the procession to Lily's grave, where the first light of dawn was just beginning to touch granite and grass. One by one, the engines cut off until silence settled over them, thick and reverent. Each member carried a white lily. Marcus had organized it weeks ago, had insisted on this ritual of remembrance. 200 men approached Lily's headstone and placed their flowers until the grave disappeared under an avalanche of white petals, until she was buried in beauty instead of earth. Evan knelt at the headstone, placing his own lily carefully. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the letter he had been working on for weeks, writing and rewriting until the words felt true. His voice shook as he read, but he pushed through, determined to be heard. Dear Lily, I'm 13 now. I live with 200 uncles who'd die for me. I go to school. I have friends. I sleep in a real bed every night, and I never go hungry. Nobody tells me I don't matter anymore. He paused, gathering strength. You died trying to bring me a blanket. I'd give anything to go back and tell you to stay home that night. To let me be cold one more time, if it meant you got to keep living. But I can't go back. None of us can. His voice cracked, but he continued. So instead, I'm trying to live in a way that makes your death mean something beyond just loss. I'm trying to be worthy of what you gave me. I help at soup kitchens because I remember what it's like to be on the other side of that counter. I leave paper cranes at your grave because you taught me small gestures mean everything. Evan's tears fell freely now. Your kindness didn't die with you. It multiplied. It spread. It changed everything. I hope wherever you are, you know that. I hope you're proud. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on top of the pile of lilies. Then he stood and stepped back into Marcus's side. Marcus wrapped his arm around the boy's shoulders, and for the first time in 4 years standing at his daughter's grave, Marcus felt something other than pure loss. He felt gratitude for the time they had had, for the love she'd left behind, for the way her kindness had rippled outward and saved not just Evan, but Marcus himself had saved all of them from becoming hard and closed and bitter. The tears came then, not the angry grief of the early years, but something gentler, something that held both sorrow and acceptance. Marcus broke down completely, the sobs wrenching themselves from deep in his chest, and he felt Evan's arms wrap around him while 200 men stood witness to grief that was finally beginning to transform into healing. Samuel stepped forward, his weathered face carved with emotion. This little girl taught us family isn't born, it's built. She taught us that love isn't about blood or biology. It's about showing up. It's about seeing people when the rest of the world looks away. His voice grew stronger. She saved Evan when nobody else would. Evan helped Marcus find purpose after loss. And together they've reminded all of us what actually matters in this short, brutal life we're living. That's Lily's legacy. That's what lives on. The sun broke fully over the horizon, turning everything golden. 200 men stood in a cemetery honoring a child who died, trying to keep a promise to someone the world had decided didn't matter. And in that moment, the distance between grief and grace felt smaller than the space between heartbeats. 5 years later, Evan stood in the parking lot of Portland State University, adjusting his backpack and looking at Marcus with emotions too complicated to name. 20 years old now, tall and lean, the haunted look in his eyes replaced by something steadier. The sparrow vest hung in his dorm closet, too precious to wear casually, but never forgotten. You sure you've got everything? Marcus's voice held the worry of every parent sending a child into the world. For the third time, yes. Evan smiled, that gap-toothed grin he'd never quite outgrown. Closed laptop, enough ramen to survive winter quarter. Call if you need anything. Marcus's throat tightened. Money advised someone to just listen. Anything, I know. Evan stepped forward and hugged him, no longer the terrified 12-year-old who'd flinched at sudden movements, but still the same person underneath. Thank you for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for fighting to keep me, for teaching me what family actually means. Lily saw you first. Marcus pulled back, keeping his hands on Evan's shoulders. I just finished what she started. You did more than that. You gave me a life. You gave me a future. Evan's voice grew thick. I'm going to be a social worker because of you, because of everyone at the clubhouse, because I know what it's like to fall through the cracks, and I'm going to spend my life making sure other kids don't. She'd be so proud of you." Marcus felt tears burning, but didn't try to stop them. "I'm so proud of you." Later, riding back toward Ashland alone, Marcus detoured to Pinewood Cemetery. Lily's grave looked different than it had 8 years ago, covered now in offerings from hundreds of people. Paper cranes in rainbow colors, smooth stones from all over Oregon, drawings and letters and flowers that appeared regularly from sources Marcus no longer tried to track. He placed his weekly white lily and sat on the ground beside the headstone, letting late afternoon sun warm his face. He did it, baby girl. Your friend, your sparrow. He's flying now, going to college to help other kids just like him. All because you decided he was worth a sandwich and some kindness. Marcus traced the letters of her name carved in granite. You were 10 years old and you understood something most adults never learn. That everyone matters, that nobody should be cold alone. That family is something you build with intention instead of something you were just born into. The wind moved through the Oregon pines, creating music that sounded like blessing. Marcus stayed until the sun began to set, talking to his daughter about Evan's plans and the clubhouse news and how Vincent had finally perfected that pot roast recipe, talking like she could hear him, believing maybe she could, because Lily's kindness hadn't died. It had multiplied into Lily's house, the youth shelter that now occupied a renovated building downtown, funded by club donations and community support. 20 beds for homeless kids, hot meals every night, art therapy and counseling, and adults who saw them. Evan worked there every summer, taught drawing classes to kids who looked exactly like he'd looked at 12, taught them to fold paper cranes, told them about a girl named Lily who'd saved his life by sharing her lunch. The legacy spread outward in ways Marcus couldn't track. Every kid Evan helped. Every kid those kids might help someday. Ripples spreading from one act of compassion performed by a 10-year-old who decided suffering mattered more than convenience. Marcus stood slowly, joints protesting the movement. He was 52 now, gray threading through his beard, but still riding every day. Still bringing lilies every Sunday. Still teaching younger club members that strength meant staying soft enough to care. He walked back to his Harley and paused before starting the engine. Behind him, Lily's grave stood covered in love. Ahead of him, Ashland waited, the clubhouse, the family they'd built, the life that continued despite loss. Marcus had learned to carry both truths simultaneously. His daughter was gone, but her love remained transformed into something that death couldn't touch. Into Evan's future and Lily's house, and 200 bikers who'd learned that family was whoever you chose to keep warm when the world got cold. He started the engine and rode toward home, toward the family waiting there, toward the only thing that had ever mattered, choosing to see people when the world looked away, choosing compassion over convenience, choosing to honor the dead by loving the living. Lily Naomi Stone had lived 10 years and changed hundreds of lives. That was enough. That had to be enough. And in the golden light of October evening, riding through Oregon forest with the wind in his face and purpose in his heart, Marcus finally believed it.